You don't feel lost, you just feel uninterested in the life you're currently living. Not sad. Not broken. Just quietly aware that this version of your life doesn't fit anymore. And that feeling, that subtle restlessness in your chest, that sense that something bigger is waiting for you, is not anxiety. It's your intuition ringing a bell you can no longer ignore. If you've been feeling like you're standing at the edge of something, but you can't quite see what's on the other side yet, this message is already finding you for a reason. Type "I'm ready" in the comments if you can feel the shift too. Because what's happening right now isn't about changing who you are. It's about finally remembering who you were always meant to become. And the call you're hearing is only the beginning of a much bigger story. And maybe what makes this moment feel so strange, Aquarius, is that nothing on the outside has dramatically changed, yet everything inside you feels different. You still wake up in the same bed. You still move through the same routines. The same streets. The same conversations. But somewhere between one breath and the next, something in you quietly stepped forward. Not loudly. Not with urgency. Just a subtle inner nudge that says, this isn't wrong, but it's no longer enough. It's that feeling when your favorite song no longer hits the same. When success doesn't taste as sweet as it used to. When even the things you once prayed for now feel oddly neutral. Not disappointing. Just strangely empty of meaning. And that's the part people don't talk about. When growth doesn't arrive as pain, it arrives as boredom. A soft disinterest. A gentle emotional distance from the life you built with an older version of yourself. You don't feel broken. You feel finished. Finished performing. Finished proving. Finished pretending that comfort is the same thing as fulfillment. And the reason this feels confusing is because your mind keeps looking for a problem to solve. But your soul isn't asking for a solution. It's asking for space. Space to imagine something beyond what's practical. Beyond what's expected. Beyond what once felt impressive. This is the quiet signal. The kind that doesn't interrupt your life, it slowly dissolves your attachment to it. And for Aquarius, this is especially powerful. Because you're not built to repeat cycles. You're built to question them. To feel the invisible currents before anyone else notices the tide has shifted. So when you start feeling detached from outcomes, less reactive to drama, less motivated by validation, that's not you losing your spark. That's you evolving beyond the version of reality that required it. It's like your nervous system has finally exhaled. And in that exhale, you realize you've been carrying a life that no longer belongs to you. Not because it failed, but because it taught you everything it could. There's a specific kind of grief in that. Not sadness. More like a quiet farewell to a chapter you never thought you'd outgrow. And here's a question I want you to sit with, gently, without forcing an answer. When was the last time you felt genuinely curious about your future instead of just responsible for it? Because curiosity is the first sign that something new is approaching. Not ambition, not pressure, curiosity. That soft inner voice that starts asking, what else is possible for me now? Who would I be if I didn't have to maintain this version of myself anymore? This isn't a crisis. It's not a breakdown. It's not a loss of direction. It's what happens when your consciousness outgrows the container it's been living in. Like water that no longer fits the shape of the glass. Not because the glass is wrong, but because you're meant to flow somewhere wider. And you don't need to know where yet. You don't need a plan. You don't need clarity. All you need to notice is that subtle shift inside your body, that gentle restlessness, that sense of emotional detachment mixed with quiet anticipation. That's not emptiness. That's space being created. Space for a life that hasn't fully formed yet, but is already trying to find you. There is a moment when the room feels smaller than it used to. Not physically. Energetically. Like the air itself has stopped moving, even though your life keeps going. You sit in familiar places, with familiar people, having familiar conversations, and yet something inside you is quietly leaning toward the exit. Not in anger. Not in drama. Just in a soft, tired kind of honesty. You start noticing it in subtle ways. You laugh a little later than everyone else. You answer messages, but your heart is no longer in the reply. You show up, but you do not fully arrive. It is a strange loneliness, because nothing is technically wrong, and yet nothing feels entirely right. Aquarius, this is what it feels like to outgrow a world that once fit you perfectly. Like wearing a jacket that used to feel warm but now keeps your breath trapped inside. You may think you are becoming distant, or difficult, or too sensitive, but what is really happening is much simpler and much more sacred. Your nervous system has shifted. Your emotional language has evolved. Your inner climate is no longer aligned with the emotional weather around you. And so even love can begin to feel heavy. Even success can feel hollow. Even safety can feel strangely suffocating. Not because those things failed you, but because you are no longer built for the same emotional temperature. Aquarius, growth does not always feel like expansion. Sometimes it feels like quiet disconnection. Sometimes it feels like sitting in your own life and thinking, why do I feel like a guest here? You are not becoming colder. You are becoming more honest with your internal truth. And honesty can feel lonely when your surroundings still speak an older version of your language. This is the part no one prepares you for. Healing does not just remove pain. It removes compatibility with certain spaces. The friendships that were built on shared wounds. The relationships that survived on mutual survival. The identity you wore when you were still trying to prove you deserved to exist. Those structures cannot stretch with you forever. Some of them were only meant to hold you until you remembered who you really are. And now you do. Even if you cannot explain it yet, you may feel guilty for wanting more. For wanting something you cannot describe. For craving depth when everyone else seems content with routine. But tell me something, Aquarius. If you stayed in a room that no longer lets you breathe, would you call that loyalty or slow self-betrayal? This loneliness you feel is not abandonment. It is alignment in progress. It is your soul learning to live without shrinking. Your heart learning to take up its full emotional space. Your mind learning that comfort and truth are not always the same thing. You did not change because something was wrong with you. You changed because something finally went right. You healed enough to notice when your environment no longer matches your frequency. You grew enough to feel when your life is lagging behind your spirit. And yes, that can feel like loss. But it is also the first sign of a future that actually fits you. A future where you no longer have to translate yourself. Where your presence feels natural instead of tolerated. Where your energy flows instead of constantly adjusting. So if today feels a little emptier than it used to rush to fill the space, sometimes the space is the message. Sometimes the silence is simply your next life clearing its throat, waiting for you to be ready to hear it. There is a different kind of exhaustion that does not come from doing too much. It comes from waiting too long to finally live. You wake up and your body feels fine, but your spirit feels like it has been standing in line for years. Always preparing, always becoming, always almost ready. You have done the work, Aquarius. You know the language of your wounds. You can name your patterns in your sleep. You understand your triggers better than most therapists. And still you feel strangely drained, not sad, not broken. Just tired in a quiet, hollow way. Tired of trying to fix something that no longer feels broken. Tired of analyzing every feeling instead of actually feeling it. Tired of turning your entire life into a project that is never complete. At some point, healing stopped feeling like medicine and started feeling like another responsibility. Another thing to optimize. Another version of who you are supposed to become. But listen closely, Aquarius. This fatigue is not a setback. It is a signal. You are not tired of life. You are tired of preparing for it. There is a subtle grief in realizing you have spent years learning how to breathe, but have not yet allowed yourself to fully inhale. You know how to sit with pain. You know how to regulate your nervous system. You know how to hold space for others. But do you know how to let joy stay without questioning it? Do you know how to rest without justifying it? Do you know how to live without turning the moment into a lesson? This is the phase no one talks about. The moment when healing is technically complete, but your identity is still built around being in recovery. You do not need more tools. You do not need another method. You do not need to dig deeper. What you need now is permission to stop rehearsing your future, to stop narrating your growth, to stop waiting for some invisible emotional certificate that says, you are finally allowed to be here. Aquarius, your soul is not a project, it is a presence, and presence does not require improvement. It requires participation. This tiredness is your system asking a simple question. When will you let yourself experience life instead of constantly preparing for it? You have healed enough to stop surviving, healed enough to stop explaining yourself, healed enough to stop living in potential. Now comes the unfamiliar part. Actually choosing, actually wanting, actually risking joy without a safety manual. It may feel disorienting at first, because growth used to mean effort, and now growth looks like softness, like spontaneity, like doing things with no deeper purpose than pleasure. That can feel almost irresponsible to someone who learned to earn every breath. But what if this is the real integration? Not becoming better, but becoming present. Not evolving, but arriving. You have already done the inner work. Now the invitation is outward. To feel the sun without interpreting it. To laugh without wondering what it means. To make choices based on desire instead of healing goals. So tell me, Aquarius, if you stop preparing for your life today, what would you actually do with it tonight? This next chapter is not about fixing. It is about inhabiting. Not about understanding yourself more deeply, but about finally letting yourself be real in the world you are already standing in. And maybe that is why your soul feels tired. Not because it is weak, but because it is ready to stop waiting and start living in real time. There is a moment when everything becomes strangely quiet inside. Not empty, not heavy, just softer than you are used to. Your thoughts slow down. Your body starts to speak again in small signals. A sigh you did not plan. A tear that surprises you. A warmth in your chest with no clear reason. This is the part no one prepared you for. The moment after the armor is no longer needed. When the nervous system finally stops scanning the room. When your breath returns to its natural rhythm. And suddenly you are not observing life anymore. You are inside it. You notice how music feels different in your skin. How silence feels less threatening. How touch becomes meaningful again. Not symbolic. Not analyzed. Just real. For a long time, you learned how to survive in your mind. You built entire worlds in your thoughts, safe places, explanations, distance. But now something gentle is happening. Your body is asking to be trusted again, not controlled, not corrected, felt. You may find yourself more emotional than usual, not unstable, just open in a way that feels unfamiliar. A movie makes you cry, a memory makes you smile. A stranger's kindness stays with you longer than expected. This is not weakness. This is regulation. This is what safety feels like when it finally arrives. Not as excitement, not as clarity, but as permission to feel without bracing yourself for impact. You start to want things again. Not goals, not outcomes. Just experiences. You want to try something new without needing a reason. You want to love without planning the ending. You want to make mistakes without turning them into life lessons. And that can feel terrifying to someone who learned to protect themselves through awareness. Because embodiment means presence. And presence means risk. Risk of joy, risk of attachment, risk of disappointment, but also risk of connection, risk of being seen, risk of actually being here. For so long, you lived slightly above your body, observing yourself, narrating your emotions, staying just detached enough to feel safe. Now you are being invited back into your own skin, into sensation, into desire, into instinct. And it may feel like you are losing control, but you are not. You are finally safe enough to stop holding yourself together. Safe enough to soften. Safe enough to respond instead of react. Safe enough to feel without needing to escape. This phase does not come with instructions. It does not announce itself. It simply arrives as a quiet hunger for aliveness. You may feel more sensitive to energy, more affected by environments, more aware of what feels right and what no longer does. Your body becomes the compass again, not your fears, not your stories, not your past. And that can feel confusing, because logic used to lead. Now sensation does. So let me ask you something, Aquarius. When was the last time you trusted your body more than your thoughts? When was the last time you chose based on what felt alive instead of what felt safe? This is the phase where healing turns into living, not as a concept, but as a physical experience. Breath, touch, emotion, desire. Not perfect, not controlled, but real. And maybe that is the real rebirth. Not becoming someone new, but finally returning to the part of you that never left. The part that knows how to feel, how to want, how to be here fully, gently, in your own body again. There is a strange tension that lives in the space between what you no longer want and what you are not yet able to imagine. It feels like standing in a dark hallway with both doors open. Behind you is the life you recognize. In front of you is something without a name. And even if the room behind you was never kind, your body still knows where the light switch is. That is why letting go feels so uncomfortable. Not because the old life was good, but because it was familiar. Your nervous system learned how to survive inside those walls. It memorized the patterns, the timing, the disappointments. There is a quiet safety in pain you can predict. You know how much it hurts. You know when it comes. You know how to prepare for it. But freedom has no rhythm yet, no shape, no guarantee. So when you begin to release the old version of your life, your body does not feel relief first. It feels disoriented, not lost in the sense of danger, lost in the sense of no longer having a script. This is the part that no one romanticizes, the empty space between identities. When you are no longer who you were, but not yet who you are becoming, it can feel lonely. Not because you are alone, but because your old reference points are gone. The habits that used to define you, the roles people expected you to play, the stories you told yourself about who you are, they begin to dissolve. And without them, your system panics a little. It asks where the rules went, where the structure is, where the certainty lives now, so it reaches back, not for happiness, but for familiarity. This is why people return to relationships that no longer fit, jobs that drain them, versions of themselves they have already outgrown. Not because they want to suffer, but because suffering they know feels safer than freedom they cannot yet picture. Aquarius, feeling lost is not a failure of direction. It is proof you have left a map that was never yours to begin with. Discomfort is not always a sign to stop. Sometimes it is simply your body learning a new language. A language without armor, without autopilot, without survival strategies. And yes, it will feel unfamiliar, quiet, unstable, like walking without a destination. But what if this pause is not emptiness but space? Space where a truer life is slowly forming, not in your mind, not in your plans, but in your nervous system itself, learning how to exist without tension, without bracing, without needing to perform a role. Letting go hurts because identity lives in the body. And when identity shifts, the body needs time to catch up. So be gentle with the part of you that wants to go back. It is not weak. It is just scared of the unknown. But also listen to the deeper pull, the one that knows discomfort is temporary and stagnation is not. So let me ask you this. If you were not allowed to return to your old life, what part of you would finally be free to exist? Because maybe what feels like being lost is actually the first moment you are no longer pretending to know exactly where you are supposed to be. And maybe that is the truest form of arrival. There is a quiet sadness that arrives without drama. No arguments. No explosions. Just a growing distance you cannot explain anymore. You look at certain people in your life and feel something shift. Not resentment. Not anger. Just a gentle sense that the conversation no longer lands in the same place. You are still sitting at the same table. But somehow, you are speaking from different inner worlds. The jokes feel familiar but hollow. The stories repeat. The silence stretches longer than it used to. And you begin to realize something tender and painful at the same time. Some people are not meant to walk into your next season. Not because anyone failed. Not because love disappeared. But because growth does not always happen in pairs. There are connections that exist for a phase of becoming. They hold you while you are learning who you are. They reflect the version of you that needed them. But once that version dissolves, the relationship no longer has the same gravity. You are not misunderstood. You are simply speaking from a new place inside yourself. And they are still speaking from the place where you used to be. That gap can feel lonely, because you remember who you were with them. The shared history, the inside jokes, the emotional shorthand that took years to build. Letting go of people is not about erasing memories. It is about honoring the role they played without forcing them into a future that no longer fits either of you. This is one of the most mature forms of grief. The kind that comes without villains, without blame, without a clear reason. Just two souls who completed the chapter they were written into together. Sometimes people do not leave your life. They simply stop being able to meet you where you are. And the hardest part is that love may still be present, but alignment is not. You may find yourself shrinking again around certain people, choosing simpler words, avoiding deeper truths, feeling the urge to protect your evolution so you do not make them uncomfortable. That is not loyalty. That is self-abandonment disguised as kindness. Aquarius, you are not meant to carry everyone into your becoming. Some connections are meant to be memories, not destinations. There is a difference between growing together and growing beyond each other, and neither one is a failure. Outgrowing someone does not mean they were wrong for you. It means they were right for a version of you that no longer exists. This is why it hurts in such a quiet way. Because nothing is broken. There is just nothing left to fix. You may feel guilt for changing, for needing different conversations, different energy, different emotional depths. But evolution does not require permission. It requires honesty. And sometimes honesty looks like distance. not as punishment, but as respect for what was and what is no longer. Not everyone leaves because of conflict. Some leave because the story reached its natural ending. And endings like this are rarely loud. They feel like drifting, like two boats slowly moving in different directions without either one sinking. So, let me ask you something, Aquarius. Who are you still holding on to out of memory rather than resonance? Because the people who truly belong in your next chapter will not require you to explain who you are becoming. They will recognize it in your presence. And the ones who cannot come with you do not need to be pushed away. They simply need to be honored as part of who you were not, who you are still meant to be. Sometimes love does not end. It just changes its address inside your heart, from companion to memory to gratitude. And that is not loss. That is completion. At some point, the image of a new life begins to dissolve, not as disappointment, but as relief. Because the version you were taught to want was always too loud, too shiny, too performative. It looked like more success, more recognition, more proof that everything you survived meant something. But when you get closer to the life that actually feels right, it does not announce itself. It does not arrive with fireworks. It feels almost ordinary. You start sleeping deeper, not because you are exhausted, but because your body finally feels safe enough to rest. Your breath slows down in moments that used to make you tense. Silence stops feeling awkward. You no longer rush to fill every gap with explanations. There is less urgency to be impressive, less need to be understood by everyone, less pressure to translate yourself into something easier to digest. The new life is not louder. It is quieter, clearer, more honest. You notice how often you say no without guilt, how rarely you feel the need to justify your choices, how your nervous system stays calm even when nothing dramatic is happening. That is the real shift. Not excitement. Stability. Not intensity. Presence. You stop chasing emotional highs. You stop romanticizing chaos. You stop confusing stimulation with meaning. And slowly, something unexpected happens. You feel content without needing a story to explain why. No big announcements. No transformation montage. Just a steady sense that your inner world and outer world are no longer at war. You laugh more quietly. You listen more deeply. You choose people based on how your body feels around them, not how impressive the connection looks on the outside. You no longer need to prove how far you have come, because you are not running from anything anymore. The new life does not require performance. It does not demand productivity. It does not measure your worth by outcomes. It asks only one thing, that you show up as you are, not as a healed version, not as an evolved identity, just as a human who feels safe enough to exist without armor. There is a simplicity to it that can feel almost underwhelming at first, because your old nervous system was trained on adrenaline, on tension, on emotional intensity. Peace can feel boring when you are used to surviving, but boredom is not emptiness. It is spaciousness. It is the space where you can finally hear your own thoughts, where desire feels gentle instead of desperate, where your energy is not leaking into roles you no longer believe in. A new life is waking up without dread, going to bed without replaying the day in your head, making decisions without rehearsing how they will be perceived. It is not about becoming extraordinary. It is about becoming aligned. Aligned with your body, with your values, with the quiet voice inside that no longer needs to shout. So let me ask you something, Aquarius. If no one was watching, if no one needed to be impressed, if nothing needed to be proven, what would your ideal day actually feel like? Not look like, feel like. Because that feeling is the blueprint, not the image, not the fantasy, not the narrative. The new life is not a destination. It is a state of being where you finally stop performing your existence and start inhabiting it. And once you taste that kind of peace, you will realize something quietly profound. You were never meant to build a life that looks good. You were meant to build a life that feels true. And that truth does not scream, it whispers, softly, steadily. From a place inside you that no longer needs to be rescued, there is a gentle truth that arrives when everything else becomes quiet. Not as motivation, not as urgency, just a simple realization that feels almost too soft to trust. You do not need to be ready, not in the way you were taught, not with confidence, not with a plan, not with a fully healed identity. Readiness is a story the mind tells to delay the moment the soul is already living in. Because if you wait until you feel fearless, you will be waiting forever. If you wait until you feel certain, you will never move. Life does not begin when you are prepared. It begins when you stop negotiating with the part of you that already knows. There is a subtle difference between being unready and being honest. Unready is fear. Honesty is awareness. And right now, your awareness is ahead of your comfort. You feel the pull, the quiet invitation, the sense that something real is already happening inside you. But the mind keeps asking for proof, for guarantees, for conditions that do not exist in living systems. The soul never asks if you are prepared. It asks if you are willing to stop pretending. Pretending that you need one more phase of growth. Pretending that you need one more version of yourself. Pretending that clarity comes before movement. Most people wait for readiness because they believe life requires a performance. That they must arrive polished, articulated, emotionally organized. But life responds to presence, not perfection. It does not require you to be certain. It requires you to be here. And here is messy. Here is unfinished. Here is human. The new life is not looking for your best self. It is looking for your real one. The one who feels unsure but curious. The one who wants but does not know how. The one who senses something true but cannot yet explain it. That is enough. Willingness is not confidence. It is consent. Consent to feel before understanding. To move without a map. To choose honesty over safety. And that kind of willingness does not feel heroic. It feels quiet, tender, almost invisible from the outside. It feels like saying yes without knowing what the yes leads to. Like letting yourself step forward without rehearsing who you will be on the other side. This is why readiness is not the threshold. Truth is. The truth that you are tired of waiting. The truth that your old self no longer fits. The truth that your nervous system is learning a new rhythm. You do not need to fix yourself before living. You do not need to understand everything before choosing. You do not need to become someone else before being allowed to begin. Life is not a reward for healing. It is the environment where healing continues. So if you feel unprepared, that is not a problem. That is a sign you are at the edge of something real. Growth does not feel like readiness. It feels like vulnerability without armor. Like standing without a script. Like allowing yourself to be seen in transition. So let me ask you this, Aquarius. If you stopped waiting to feel ready, what truth would you finally let yourself act on? Because maybe readiness was never the gate. Maybe honesty was. And the only thing the new life is asking from you is not perfection, not clarity, not certainty. Just this. That you stop pretending you are not already being called. And maybe the most surprising part of this entire journey is not that your life is changing, but that you finally stopped resisting the change, not with force. Not with effort. Just with a quiet kind of surrender that feels like trust. Trust in your timing. Trust in your body. Trust in the voice that brought you here tonight. Because nothing you heard was meant to convince you. It was meant to remind you. Remind you that you are not late, not behind, not broken. You are exactly where a new life begins. Not the kind that looks impressive. The kind that feels real when no one is watching. The kind where your nervous system exhales. Where your heart no longer needs armor. Where your soul is not trying to prove anything anymore. Aquarius, you did not stumble into this moment by accident. You were guided here by a version of yourself that has been quietly waking up for a long time. And if something inside you feels lighter right now, more spacious, more honest than it did an hour ago, that is not imagination. That is alignment. This is not the end of a story. It is the moment you realize you are no longer waiting to live inside it. So take this breath with me. Not as closure, but as arrival. And if you felt even one sentence touch something real in you, leave a comment. Not for me. For yourself. Let your presence be seen. Let your truth take up space. Subscribe if you want to keep walking this path together. This is not a channel. It is a frequency. A place where Aquarius souls remember who they are. And before you go, trust this one thing. The next message is already forming, not on the screen. Inside you. The journey continues. And this time you are finally walking it as yourself.